welcome to Capitol Hill. Well, he's Tony Abbott and he's here to help. That was the message from the opposition leader, who says he's willing to give the government a hand to help it solve the problem over its asylum seeker policy. The Prime Minister says legislative change would be needed if offshore processing is to be an option, but she's not sure that the help from Tony Abbott comes without strings attached. The Prime Minister has other problems to deal with too. The left doesn't want any offshore processing, and any solution she comes up with will have to comply with the UN Convention on Refugees and possibly make it through the courts. To discuss the day's events, I've been joined by Labor MP Steve Georganas and Liberal Senator Mitch Fifield. Welcome to you both.
Good evening, Linda.
Hi, Mitch.
Steve, do you think the Cabinet should opt for a solution that allows offshore processing to continue, or should it be onshore processing only for asylum seekers?
Well, look, all options are on the table at the moment. We'll be having discussions over the next week, and of course, as I said, all options are on the table. What we really need to find out, though, is whether Tony Abbott is actually genuine, and he needs to clarify what his message was today. Is this about assisting the government and ensuring that we can come up with a solution that will benefit all, or is it just another political ploy by Tony Abbott to try and have a political fix that only gives the advantage to his side of politics to play politics again?
But in the end, Steve, doesn't the government have to come up with the policy, and isn't there internal differences about what the government should do, with the left saying it wants a return to the party platform, which is onshore processing only and limited mandatory detention?
Well, this is certainly a time to have that discussion, and we'll be discussing that, and I'm not going to disclose here today what we'll be discussing in caucus in the next week or so. But certainly everyone will have their say in caucus. Everyone will be able to to stand up and have their say. But one thing I can assure you is when we leave that caucus room, we'll all be united on whatever decision through our democratic process that we come up with. But what I also have to say today is that Tony Abbott has to clarify today what he said in terms of what he means by assisting the government to come up with a solution. Now, on the one hand, he can't criticise the government and to say that the High Court decision last week did not count in Nauru, and on the other hand, want to assist the government to come up with a solution to look at offshore processing. So he has to make up his mind one way or another and ensure that he's not playing politics, and we're open to all suggestions.
Mitch, does the Coalition believe that legislative change is needed if offshore processing is to continue to be an option, and is the help Tony Abbott's offering unconditional?
Well, the government is really in the best position to advise whether legislative change is needed. We've indicated that if legislative change is required to give effect to offshore processing, then we're very happy to talk about that. We're very happy to assist the government. But this situation is truly farcical. Here we have the government saying that the opposition need to clarify its policy and its intentions and indicate whether it's genuine in its desire to help the government. Well, we have had a consistent policy all the way. We have been consistent in wanting to assist the government. We have said since the inception of this government that they should maintain, that they should have offshore processing at Nauru, that they should have temporary protection visas, and that they should maintain a compassionate but firm stance in favour of an orderly system of processing. They haven't done that. We've given that advice and we're still giving it.
But if the Coalition, if you are offering the government help, isn't it fair to say whether that help comes with strings attached, whether you want it to be specific to, say, Nauru, or you're willing to give the government an option that leaves Malaysia as a solution on the table?
Well, if the government want to examine the Nauru option, which we think they should, which we don't think that the High Court decision rules out, if they want to examine that, then we're happy to sit down and we're happy to help make the changes to the law that would give effect to that.
But it's fair to say you weren't happy with the Nauru solution. Would you then allow a legislative change that allowed the Nauru solution to be revived?
Well, let's start with the Nauru solution. It's worked before. It can work again. The government of Nauru is ready, willing and able. The High Court judgment doesn't appear at face value to necessarily rule out Nauru. It might make it slightly more difficult, but it doesn't rule it out. The government of Nauru have signed the UN Convention for Refugees. That's due to take effect shortly. And the government of Nauru have also indicated that they are prepared to adjust their domestic law to make sure that it's not in conflict with the High Court decision. So the most sensible approach for the government would be to examine the Nauru option. That's our recommendation, and we're happy to sit down and talk to them.
Steve, should the government accept an offer of help from Tony Abbott with open arms, because it doesn't yet seem to know, the Cabinet doesn't yet seem to know what it wants to do?
Well, look, as I said, Tony Abbott has to clarify what that help is that he's talking about. Again, we hear from the opposition just now that on one hand, they don't accept the advice of the High Court decision regarding Nauru, and on the other hand, they want to work with us legislatively. They have to make up their mind whether they're playing politics with this issue, which is a very important issue, a very complex issue, can I say, and an issue that won't get fixed with one-line grabs, as the government has been using. As I said, all options are on the table, and we will be looking at all those options over the next few days and over the next week or so.
Steve, the Labor Party doesn't even have a one-line grab. We've got a policy, it's a consistent policy. You should start listening to us.
What I can say is that we're dealing with human lives here. We're dealing with people. We have over 40 million people across the world in refugee camps and refugees or people that are people movement across the world. Australia had just over 3,000 last year that came as undisclosed boat arrivals. Now let's get this into perspective. When I'm out in my electorate, I'm talking to people. They want to talk about the economy, job security. They want to talk about education for their children. They want to ensure that they've got the health services that they require. And certainly, of course, this is an issue, and we need to deal with it with level heads, without inciting extreme views in the community, and to ensure that we have a long-term, lasting solution, and a solution that is covered by the UN, ensuring that we have a global solution within our area as well.
Steve, are you confident that the Cabinet is looking at the option of processing onshore only?
Look, I can't tell you what the Cabinet is looking into. I'm not privy to the Cabinet discussions, and nor is anyone else. All I know is that all options are on the table. What we need to do is ensure that we do all that we can to stop the people smugglers, those people that are profiteering from bringing people to our shores. And it's just like driving along the road. If you come across a roadblock, you don't just walk out of your car and give up on the trip. You look at ways of getting around it, and that's what we'll be doing.
Mitch, if the coalition does back any legislative change put forward by the government, does that wed you to the policy the government ultimately proceeds with, whether it's Nauru, whether it's Malaysia?
Well, it's a hypothetical, Lyndall. We don't know if the government would accept all of our advice. We don't know if the government would introduce temporary protection visas as well. We've offered to assist. We've offered to talk to the government to help with changes to the Migration Act if that's necessary. But as we've seen with this government, even if you provide assistance, even if you provide good advice, they have a terrific capacity to maladminister any policy that they have. But Lyndall, I've got to say, I'm almost speechless that I keep hearing that the opposition have got to clarify its position. This government does not have a border protection policy. This government does not have an asylum seeker policy. Steve cannot give any indication as to what the government's current position is. The onus is hardly on the government the onus is hardly on the opposition to come up with a solution here. Despite that, we have, and the government should take heed.
If I could move on to another issue, the Australian Industry Group has said the government's industrial relations changes have led to less workforce flexibility, that most employers want individual agreements reinstated, and higher penalty rates have caused problems. Mitch, Tony Abbott said he'll proceed with industrial relations policy on a problem-solving basis. Hasn't the Australian Industry Group, along with other business groups, identified individual agreements and penalty rates as the problems?
Well, the Australian Industry Group have identified problems. We've said all along that we want to listen to what business has to say. We want to listen to what employees have to say about problems with the Fair Work legislation of this government. I've got to say at the outset, however little, lest there be any hysterical cries from Steve, that we did get the message from the last election, from the 2007 election, that work choices was dead. We won't be revisiting work choices, but that's not to say that the current government have found some industrial relations nirvana or some industrial perfection. The legislation should be reviewed. The government is proposing to do that in January. We think that that should be brought forward, and we're very happy to look at practical solutions to problems which business and employees identify.
You say you want to hear from business and employees, but haven't business been raising these same concerns for many months?
Business are raising these concerns, absolutely, but it's not just for the opposition to listen to those, it's also for the government to listen to those, and that's why we think that the government should bring forward their formal review. We will have an industrial relations policy at the next election. It won't be radical, it won't be ideological, but it will respond to some of the concerns which are being expressed.
Steve, if the review in January does throw up the sorts of problems we've been hearing about from business for some time, should the legislation be changed? Steve? Should the government accept, if the review does throw up the sort of problems that business has been raising, should the government accept that and change its laws?
Look, we looked into work choices. We threw work choices out. We know that people under work choices, especially women, were approximately $80 to $90 worse off than what they were without work choices. Now, when we hear Mitch and others talking about looking and reviewing the legislation, we know it's code for bringing back work choices. What we've seen over the last few days, what we've seen over the last few days is Tony Abbott trying to resurrect work choices, giving it mouth-to-mouth resuscitation to try and get it up and running again, and certainly a whole line of opposition members doing the same thing, lining up to give it mouth-to-mouth resuscitation.
But is it possible to say that the government's legislation is perfect and doesn't need changing?
Look, we're always looking at the legislation. I think we've got it about right. We've looked at productivity in other ways. We've ensured that we've got trade training centres up and running where you see students are actually training in trades before they actually leave school so they can be productive when they're out in the workforce. We're looking at employing older people and ensuring that we have schemes up and running to employ those people. There are many things that the government is doing and these things will take some time. But certainly when we hear the opposition using language like looking at the legislation, looking at individual contracts, we know it's code for bringing back work choices. And like I said, you've got Tony Abbott trying to give it mouth-to-mouth resuscitation with a whole conga line of coalition members lining up to help out in that mouth-to-mouth resuscitation of work choices.
And that's where we'll have to leave it, gentlemen. Mitch Fifield and Steve Georgianis, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining Capitol Hill. Join us at the same time tomorrow.